All right, here with Daniel Liem on today's episode of the Launch Notes podcast. Daniel, thanks for joining us today. Really excited for this one.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I know you've worked across product orgs at some pretty cool companies in your career so far. Maybe just to set the stage, give folks the kind of quick background of how you got into product work and some of the stuff you've worked on so far.
Yeah, so I came from an engineering background. I graduated with computer science, and back in school, which was at Stanford, that was where it was at the heart of Silicon Valley. Lots of technology companies were trying to recruit you left and right. And I realized after talking to a ton of friends and mentors that I'm really passionate about, no matter what, being in technology, no matter what I do. I think that's the most exciting place to be in the area, but also the most exciting trend in the world. And I was back then, like it was 10 years ago. So this was in like 2011, and I already felt that strongly. And I wanted to be a part of it. Whether I wanted to be an engineer or other role was not that clear until I started talking to certain people at Stanford, like VCs and startup founders. And I realized that if I wanted to learn and be successful the most in this category, I should probably do something that allows me to get as close to startup world as possible, to learn from founders. I had short stints of internships at startups and stints at large companies, and realized that big tech is not for me. It was a bit slow. I wanted to be at a faster paced environment where I could learn faster. And so that's a long-winded answer to how I ended up in certain roles in my career, from the hyper growth phase of Uber back in 2016 to I had a bit of time at Dropbox as a product manager right before they went public. That's a little bit more late stage. And then I was also at a startup called Fiscal Note, which is a GovTech startup based in Washington, D.C. They were 20 people at the time, and now they're, I think, over 800 people, and they already went public as well. And I've been a product manager in those jobs all the time. And I told you that I did a bit of VC internships back in school. That back then had opened up this window of opportunity that allowed me to be interested in that space and what it means to be an investor, which is essentially to back the best founders and to believe in the next big idea, big trend, big industry for the next decade. And as I said, I wanted to be a part of startups as much as possible. So being an investor after Dropbox was a natural segue in my career. I joined Obvious Ventures, focused on future work and SaaS. That's pretty much what I've done all my career. Even at Uber, I was on a platform side on developer experience, not on a marketplace team. So I focused on future work and SaaS at Obvious Ventures. And then to bring this home, at Obvious, I ran into two of my classmates from school, Doug Sfreno and Vivek Nair. They were starting a company that I got really excited about and I wanted to invest in, but I got so excited that I was like, I might as well just work with them. This is a rare opportunity to work with close friends like Jake and Tyler. It's just a really rare opportunity to run by two guys that you're really excited about and know that are really smart and competent in their field on. So I decided to take the leap of faith and join them to start a company. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, very, very cool. Very, you packed a ton of experience into, you spend a couple of years anywhere in Silicon Valley and it's like dog years, like you get an eternity of experience in a short amount of time. But yeah, you've packed a ton into a relatively short amount of time there. And I'm sure going back to coming out of Stanford, I mean, I'm doing CS Stanford, especially that era where it's like really like things are especially frothy at FANG, where it's like, I'm sure you could have had your pick of a super cushy FANG job. Did you move across the country to work at Fiscal Note? Did you go work in Washington?
Yeah, I moved to Washington, D.C. for Fiscal Note for just a year. I remember back then when I graduated, I was like, I didn't want to be in Silicon Valley because I wanted to explore the country a bit more because I knew I'd be back here one way or another. This is where my home base
Yeah.
is. And so I took the leap of faith to go to Washington, D.C. I had some stint in New York as well. And that was to the extent of my exposure in the East Coast.
Very cool. And then 2016 at Uber, can you kind of set the stage? Was it, yeah, set the stage a little bit for me on what was going on. I'm guessing this was pre-IPO. What was kind of going on at the company at that? Because that was a super exciting time for Uber, and they were like the penultimate, like, you want to talk about like a startup environment. They were like the startup that, everyone was talking about, especially then.
Yeah. Especially in 2016, that was the peak. I would say, in summary, I would say that was a career-defining opportunity for me. It all not only defined my career and what I was passionate about, but it also created a lot of lifelong friends. One of whom actually turned into my groomsman last year. So like, there's like a lot of amazing memories coming out of that, and also incredible people that came out. One of our advisors is Yuki, who's the CPO of Figma, and really closely with. A ton of them became founders. One of them I invested in, called Linear. The co-founder, the CTO, his name's Thomas. He was actually an engineer on the platform team that I worked with. We were, Yuki and I and a bunch of other people were working on redefining the Rider app and making it what it is today. You probably don't remember what it was before, which is like an older skin, an older aesthetic. But that's all to say that like Uber was one of the most defining and tumultuous companies that could ever have been around at that time. All the things from the ability to ship so quickly and act like a startup, even though they were essentially 2,000 to 4,000 people, to all of the problems that came out of Uber that finally imploded in 2017. What a time it was for someone like me who just came out of school, basically 2 to 3 years out of school, having to walk through the doors every time in media, always trying to you and interview you. It was just a roller coaster of a ride for me, and I could like unpack any of these if you want. But
I mean, you've got like a front row seat to like so much there. This could go a bunch of different directions, but I want to zero in on one thing you said, which was just like their ability to ship so quickly, and it did feel like there was a culture, like having not worked there, but just being around SF and startups at the time. It was like they were moving so fast and at scale. It was kind of blowing everyone's mind. And also just like the holding on to that like scrappy, move fast startup culture. Even at, you said the scale, you said 1,000, 2,000 people, usually some pretty gnarly bureaucracy is set in by then. But like, what was it, especially around like shipping and shipping quickly? Like, were there certain practices? Like, what was it in the DNA there that kind of created that culture and ability to constantly ship and improve the entire, product?
I think it honestly came from a singular point of person. Like, it came all the way from the top. Travis Kalanick was such a different kind of CEO, and he created a culture where you should, like the early days of Facebook, move fast and break things. This is a tangent, but like, we took it too far to the point where it caused a lot of problems. But for the most part, it created an incredibly valuable business because it created this mindset that everyone should not complain and think to the moon and try to build and do whatever it takes to win, essentially. Do whatever it takes to ship a product to get into the hands of millions of users that you're constantly building for, and creating that standard so that you always are shipping with a mindset of shipping to millions of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was crazy because at 2,000, 3,000 people at the time, at some point processes will start to break down if you don't have a real process, if you're not managing your code base well, because we were, remember, it's like basically one mono repo, one big repository
Oh,
for the
wow.
long, until we
Yeah.
split it out into eats and driver and such like that. But we were basically one big mobile app essentially. And at some point, if you keep saying ship fast, things are going to start to break down, and you need to create some process around that. And but people were still coming in with the attitude of, we got to do whatever it takes to win and ship. And so I remember constantly facing outages, constantly facing major product decisions that could cost us 20 versus $30 million. Major kinds of existential things that kept me up all night long, and sometimes the weekend, just to make sure that we do a good job. And the culture was crazy, but it turned out to be the right call at that time to create what Uber is today.
Yeah, it sounds like, and this is like this is a trend you pick up, whether it's like, you know, Facebook or PayPal or like anything, that any stories from these like meteoric startups, like it feels like everything that they're dealing, it's always like high stakes. And like, I'm getting that sense. It was like everything you were dealing with, it was like, it might've been 10 things in a day, and they were all like high stakes situations. It seems like good startups or successful startups kind of relentlessly pursue high stakes problems. It's why it's easy to burn out at a startup, like, because everything feels like the end of the world, and it kind of feels like you made 5 company defining decisions in one day. But it's, you know, really relentlessly focusing on stuff with impact and stakes.
But what one takeaway from this all is that there is a balance that you need to strike between being ambitious, but at the same time being process driven or being scalable. I would say, because if you only think about whatever they called it back then, hustling and always be waiting, and like always be shipping, at some point that's going to implode, right?
It could bite you in the ass.
It can manifest in tech debt or cultural political problems, because teams are getting too big, too fast, and promoted too quickly.
Right.
In the form of like not understanding your market well, and your product turns out horribly. So you need a balance between these two worlds constantly. And as a founder, that's a really hard problem. That's a founder problem that we all face.
Yeah. Is there anything, as you kind of work with like in a kind of an investor role with other startups now, like any kind of advice that you give or tactics, tips in terms of, you know, here's how to keep up a good pace, maybe without kind of doing irreparable harm to the organization along the way? Like, how do you kind of advise young startups in this light now?
Yeah, and I would have to preempt this by saying I'm also still trying to figure it out myself as a founder, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We're constantly in the moments as well. But I'm going to draw attention to my absolute favorite startup right now that I incessantly talk about with friends, which is Linear. And that's like the company that everyone loves right today. Linear is the actual polar opposite of Uber. And actually, I think it was pretty intentional, because it came from Thomas's direction as well as Kari, the CEO. But I remember Thomas had an interview where he said something like, running quickly and shipping fast could only get you so far. But if you want to have a long-term business that achieves incredible long-term value, you should be really thoughtful and intentional about everything you do. And you look at the way that Linear presents and builds products today, they're actually quite, I would say, contrarian and slow. They focus a lot on the details and keeping the bar really, really high and shipping the best product possible. After doing that, everything naturally follows: revenue, retention, engagement, go to market. And look at what it's done to Linear today. It's beautiful. They are just a cash cow machine that really, like, I think everyone could just leave from Linear today and we'll just keep running and people will still pay for the product. That's a very different mindset from a company like Uber. Granted, Uber is a marketplace business and Linear is a SaaS software business, so that could be there could be differences there. But I think the thing that I would say to any founder today is going back to that point that I made: strike the right balance that fits your persona and fits your market that you're trying to take on. It's not just the fact that you need to always grind it and hustle in order to win. It's quite possible that you can just be the Linear style approach of being detail oriented and thoughtful and fundamentalist that could actually still also make you win. You just need to find the right balance that fits the profile of your founding team, but also fits the requirements of the market that you're in. There's not one size fits all. Everything will be different, and find that balance so that it works best for you. It's a little bit ambiguous of an answer, but
let's dig into Linear a little bit more, because like, man, I totally agree with you. Like, they're one of those startups. Like, I feel like I've seen this, I've been in startups for almost 10 years now. And like a couple times I feel like I've seen a startup like this come up, and I feel like Figma was the same thing. Like, it almost feels like a magic trick. Like, they came out of nowhere and I'm like, man, how did they do that? How did they pull that off? Like, coming out of nowhere in an unexpected, like what you might expect to be a mature market, like suddenly having this like amazing traction, a really, really elegant product. I think they have a really elegant product and a really thoughtful, fresh experience. Like, you feel that on all the way from their homepage to their, I'm sure their documentation and support experience. And, it does feel like a very thoughtful, intentional, holistic experience. Like, what else did they do there? Because I think a lot of other startups are looking at Linear and going like, man, how the hell do we get some of that?
I think one thing that they just got so good at is taking a step back, the process that they took in order to build Linear. I love this phrase called process over outcome. You don't measure yourself by the outcome. You measure yourself by how well your process is built. I live by that. And that, in other words, if you had a great outcome, say as an investor, you had $1 billion exit, but you just got lucky, you should penalize yourself for that. If you actually got a really good investment and it's a really good fundamentally driven company, but it didn't turn out the way you thought, you should still reward yourself for that.
Yeah.
That's actually something you should know that you should continue to do. You just got unlucky. You can't control it at the end of the day. What Linear did was control their process so well. Till this day, they continue to be unwavered with how they approach product building. They will not lower the bar, or they will not lower the stakes whatsoever in terms of design quality, in terms of quality, in terms of user love. And it comes across in more than just the software, but like their ethos, the way they write, the website, the people they hire. It's like they obsess over it down to the core, down to the bones of the company, that you see it across everywhere. If you think about it, Linear is a pretty simple product to build. My co-founders and I could build that this year. But it wouldn't go anywhere because the product required for that market enhanced level of user love and user obsession that could only come from the meticulousness of the process of building a design for product in that space.
Yeah.
And so, I can also speculate what the process is for something like Uber. It might be a lot more of like the hustle mindset because you need to build a marketplace, supply and
Mm.
demand. So that could
Hmm.
also be a reason why it worked well for them. But at least for Linear, the process they took worked really well, and they proved that it's very profitable.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And it's really clear, and it does really remind you of like some of the most successful, the kind of iconic founders and iconic startups where you can get those, you can get founders and startups where it's like, yeah, I'm a product guy, I obsess over product, or I'm an engineering guy, I obsess over engineering or design or whatever. But the really iconic ones do seem to focus on like, hey, we're not going to have like a beautiful product and a crappy website, or we're not going to have like a greatly designed product and like, crappy load times and bad documentation. Like, we're going to
Yeah.
kind of, if we're going to sweat the detail, we're going to sweat the detail on the full experience that we're putting out in the world, not
Yeah.
just one kind of pillar of it.
Yeah, exactly. Go all in
Hmm.
in what you believe in and your first principles, and don't fret. Don't flinch on that principle. Go at
Hmm.
it with full force consistently,
Yeah.
um, and it'll work. And I think, by the way, as I'm talking to you about this, it's actually pretty apparent that these principles, these processes are very industry specific. Like you kind of see a lot of this user love coming from Figma and Notion and
Hmm.
Airtable and Zapier as well, right?
Yeah.
All these companies care a lot about the craftsmanship of software building. Um, in other industries, that may not be necessary as much.
Hmm.
Uh, Other industries, it might just be about more operational complexity. Uh, Other industries, the bar for UX might be lower, maybe like in vertical industries like manufacturing, right?
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
small business stuff. Like it might be different, but at least in terms of software, the process is create user obsession, build something that people want,
Hmm.
and you'll make money from there.
It's funny you mentioned Notion. I remember when Notion was first, because I guess they kind of really popped 2017, 16 was when they really started to like, you really started to kind of around SF hear about them. Um, it seemed like a year or so before that they were doing this. I remember reading this content series. I think maybe one of the founders was doing it, or they were working on, they were like doing these like very beautiful long form write-ups with like
Mhm.
pioneers of like the computer science. They'd like go down to Palo Alto and like talk to some like professor who like invented like the whatever, like invented some file drive in the 60s, and have this like beautiful photos and like lengthy interview about this like technical thing. It's just like, man, like you can tell these people like really care about just like the detail and experience they're putting out into the world, and it's
Yeah.
showing in this like early kind of like content, side project that they're doing. Like that always sort of
Yeah.
stuck with me, is like, man, these are people who are going to like make beautiful product if they care this much about this industry and the design of it all.
And yeah, you
Any
think about,
Yeah.
do we need any more note taking apps out there? Not really.
Yeah,
Notion.
exactly. But and that's why it's always amazing when like a Notion shows up, or even like a Linear for that matter, where it's like, who would have expected, like a gorgeous Jira competitor in 2023? But here we are.
Wow.
um, any other, I mean, as you work with other companies or as you kind of charge into your own entrepreneurship, any other like product lessons? Because it does often seem to be like, you know, PM lessons for new startups. I think they're kind of drowning in, engineering advice. They're kind of drowning in design advice. Product advice can be kind of harder to pin down at that stage, it feels like.
Yeah.
Um, any kind of like common like lessons or challenges that you're hearing from founders?
Yeah. I mean, this might be a blend between founder mindset and also product mindset, but I think they kind of go hand in hand because a product manager is, I would like to call it, some people may disagree, but it feels a little bit like the mini CEO for that product.
Mm,
So there's a lot of lessons that can actually be transferred across these two roles. And I have a framework for this, which is essentially a strong product is built out of a really strong vision for the product, persistence around taking action and executing against that vision. And then third, automating as many systems as you can in order to get to that vision. And I could break these things down. For a vision, it's as simple as
we've got strong vision, persistence, and then automation.
Yeah.
Let's break it down. Yeah.
So for a vision, it's as simple as, do you have a contrarian viewpoint of a particular market or of a particular product, a particular feature that you believe is different from the rest, but needs to be there in order to make a step change function, in order to make some change in that industry? Or, I'm talking from the founder perspective, but also from the product perspective, that can make incremental improvements to that company.
Yeah.
Do you have intentionality around that? And if so, what's your data to back that up? So that's the vision.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that vision is compelling enough to drive a story that you can then recruit people to back behind.
Yeah. So it's, to draw an example out of that, it's like, it's not just, hey, we're going to go compete with Adobe. It's, we can do this in the browser because of the technology we have. Like, we're going to start a company called Figma. We're going to recreate the Creative Suite in the browser. That can be done now. We have data and demos that prove it, and we are very opinionated about that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not a rocket science idea, but how many people actually follow through with doing it?
For sure. Yeah.
Like that brings me to my second point, which is persistence. It's like it's interchangeable with like execution, essentially, where a strong vision like that. I'm sure everyone talked about multiplayer mode collaboration or web browser based tailwinds.
Yeah.
They're all important, but how many of you actually executed on that? Go full time to build that future product. You know how long it took Figma to do it, right? Back then, I think in 2012, it was a phenomenal feat for them to basically redo the Chrome browser so that it allows you to do multiplayer mode collaboration. Evan Wallace is a god as for being able to
for sure,
execute on that. And being persistent and constantly pushing towards that vision is such a underrated skill required of a product manager or a founder, to be able to have the conviction to keep the team moving forward, to continue building towards that vision is so key. That sometimes may mean stalling. Like some people, at a company, maybe you may see your engineering team and your design team build on a feature that you're convinced about, but it hasn't shown any progress or perform or output for after a year. You're only just building it, but it hasn't actually matriculated or manifested into like an actual product yet. If you at your core still believe in that vision, you should keep pushing for it. And you should do whatever it takes to show that you should continue to invest in it. That's part of the product person's job. Find ways to convince people to rally behind you to say that this is worth continuing to invest in. At any moment when you lose that conviction, you should be intellectually honest with yourself and take a step back to ask: do you really believe in what you believe in? Or should we actually stop? Or is this a sunk cost? In which case, it's totally fine too. Switch gears and do something else. But if you do believe in something, it's your job to keep pushing it forward. So that's what I mean by persistence around execution. Being persistent about your vision. And I mean, I have to say too, like, this is the epitome of being a founder, right? Like, you have some vision about a 7-year horizon of an industry, your job is to be persistent towards that same vision for 7 years. That's the
Right.
ultimatum. That's the ultimate form of persistence.
Yeah, in no scenario at Uber, to tie back to our Uber stories, like would Travis have said like, yeah, you know what, we'll let people hail Ubers too, like the old fashioned way.
Yeah.
If you see one on the street, you can raise your hand. You don't have to use the app. It's like that's so the antithesis of the vision that they had, and it's just like you're gonna kind of persistently operate within this vision, and
Yeah.
not sort of, you know, not sort of compromise
Yeah.
when it comes to like fundamental, you know, ideas of the vision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the takeaway from that is like vision is nothing without persistence. And then it ties to the third point, which is I just like the word automation because it embodies this idea that as a product manager, your job is to always think of ways to essentially accelerate and speed up that persistence in executing the product. And you could do that in many ways. It involves recruiting the right people, hiring the right engineers on your team, working with the EM to hire the right engineers, or maybe hiring more product managers under you, or maybe hiring or referring the right product designer, or hiring the right marketer. It's not just hiring too. Automation could mean like finding the right tools, the right services to help do things like analytics, to do things like find the right tools to do A/B testing, to build a process to do user research, to talk to customers so that you could continue to validate and justify why you should continue to build this product or how you should change it. And then finding ways to automate these processes. Again, it's about process over outcome. Finding ways to automate these things to grease the wheel even further is going to be just instrumental to the continuation of executing on your vision.
Yeah.
And you know, that's basically me saying work smart, don't just work hard. You know, persistence is about working hard. Automation is about working smart.
I think a lot of, especially earlier stage teams, get so hung up in, they'll see things like automation, not so much. Process, definitely you see get like a kind of unfairly get a bad reputation. People associate it with the bad versions of process. They've maybe seen it like very bureaucratic companies, or they associate it with like, gosh, there's going to be this big upfront investment and lift in setting this up, and we don't have time, and we've got to go. So I'll just do this manually. Then obviously, like, you know, then end up kind of doing things manually for too long, and that creates problems. But any sort of advice or kind of ways to overcome that mental barrier that smaller teams have around things like process and automation?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially at the earlier stages, you definitely don't want to slow yourself down too much by adding too much process too early on. I've just seen so many companies that end up failing because they basically got outcompeted because they were too slow to ship something to market. I mean, I actually believe that if you're as early as a founding team, maybe even less than 10 employees, you should really not think much about the process and do as little process as possible. Bare minimum is like take notes on Notion to record certain things, or like ideate on Figma, but don't create too much process to the point where it slows you down. And in many ways, that's actually the definition of automation, right? You're automating your process by not actually creating process for now, you know? Up until the point where you need the process, then you find a way to automate that process. I remember like we were, there was a discussion at a certain point around when we had to discuss like whether we wanted to build more certain kinds of testing type protocols like QA, UI tests, and all that stuff. But then we took a step back and looked at the product, and we were like, this product still doesn't have product market fit. How about we focus more on designing the product or iterating on it as opposed to the infrastructure on the technical side, because that's more important. And building the muscle to make that decision to decide what's most important, whether you automate this or that, is going to be key in the early stages to move quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the early stage founder, I would really try to automate the process of building your product, not by creating processes, and
Yeah.
just trying to think about how do we iterate as fast as possible so that we ultimately find product market fit.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I hope that connects with more folks, because has a huge impact. So the last startup I was at, we worked in we did kind of business process automation, workflow automation. So we kind of worked hands-on with a bunch of companies, helping them build their business process is a very vertical tool. So like different types of very horizontal rather tools. So like different types of industries we got to see, and really get like kind of hands-on with the different processes that ran a lot of these companies. And it seemed to be what we would see a lot, the two big ways process and automation go wrong. Number one, people try to just do way too much. They take too big of they try to bite too much of the cheeseburger at once. Like they try to do too much up front and set up this big, complex, extremely arduous thing from the bat. And then number two is, folks don't realize like a good process is not this like static thing that you set up and forget. Like it's like a product. Like you tweak it, you tune it, you adjust it. Conditions, your business changes. Like you have to kind of constantly like optimize. You're optimizing the overall system and not like each unit, but you're still kind of, it's not a hands-off thing where it's like, oh, we automated that process 5 years ago and now we don't have to deal with it. It's like, no, you learn. It's like a product. You learn, you adjust, like you find a new way. There's new technology, there's new opportunities, there's different conditions, and you kind of adjust it to your needs as you go. But people do this set and forget with like, well, that's the process. And then it's like, yeah, like 5 years down the road, like it doesn't work and everyone hates it.
Yeah, exactly. I think for a lot of inexperienced folks, inexperienced early stage founders or employees, especially those coming from big tech, they over-index on these things because that's what they're used to. But let's not forget to ruthlessly prioritize what's most important, which is like crafting the best vision possible for your space and your idea, and then ruthlessly executing against that. You maybe you raise money, but like if you're like a seed or a series A, you might have not found product market fit yet. That should be your ultimate goal. Who cares about everything else? Don't get distracted. It is so easy to be distracted. There's too many things, right?
Yeah.
Stop. Like the way to automate yourself out of it is don't create a lot of these processes and just stay focused on what's most important, your vision and executing on that vision. And that's actually the answer to automating yourself out, right? Like that is automation itself. Automate yourself on focusing on what's the highest priority by removing everything that's not important. I'll mention one other thing that I also live by. I learned this from my wife actually, and she makes fun of me because I'm not as good as her at this, but it's the 80-20 rule, which is like, get 80% of your work done with 20% effort. If there's like, it's essentially like psychologically, if you put more than 20% of your effort, you're only going to get an incremental amount of output done of the rest of the 20%. You could pretty much get 80% of your work done with just 20% effort that you put into that project. And you should feel okay that it's done, then perfect. And move on to the next project and the next item. Nothing needs to be perfect in the startup world, in the early stage life of a startup. Like your goal is to like execute, move quickly, and make decisions quickly. And you will make mistakes because you can't control the outcome, but at least your process is done in terms of being 80-20 with the approach of completing projects.
Yeah, there's this like power law effect there too, where it's like the closer you get to trying to like tackle 100%, like the more of a compounded effort it is going to take. Like getting from 99 to 99.5 is going to be so much more effort than it was to even get from 0 to 99, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to a point where like the incremental effort to, you know, get that extra percentage point of whatever your idea of perfection is going to be like a resource drain. And then if you live your life that way or run your company that way, then obviously the overall system will fail.
Yeah, I saw a tweet where the best CEOs are the ones who makes the fastest decisions, not the best decisions.
Oh yeah,
I
I definitely can see the truth in that. Well, I know we've got a wrap here. I feel like I feel badly. I tell you, you're fired up about this. These are great topics.
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing your passion around product and company building with us today. If folks want to reach out, say hi, pitch their startup, get in touch, how could they find you?
Yeah, I'm on basically Twitter. My handle is @DCLIEM, just my name.
Perfect.
That'd probably be the best way. And I'm also like looking at LinkedIn every now and then.
Awesome.
And I mean, I am full-time at a startup as well, starting my thing. So if anyone wants to just jam about startup life too, that's not just investing, I'm more than happy to chat about that. I'm still trying to learn from others too, you know.
Perfect. Well, we'll find those links and drop them in the show notes so folks can find those. But otherwise, yeah, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing everything. Super valuable to our audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Blake. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Take care.